As we gather in, I'm going to just show you a quick slideshow. St. James Church in Cannonball, North Dakota, which is on the Standing Rock Sioux Indian Reservation, burned down last July the 25th, which is the feast day of St. James. It was an arson fire, and we've been in the process of getting it rebuilt. And so it's something that has taken up our imaginations and has revitalized ministry at St. James, and the building is now second generation building for them, and they're looking at how to build that reflects who they are as a Native people. Prior to this, when buildings were put up, they were put up in a European model, and so this is a new thing that draws on some very old things about their culture and the way that they live. So let me just get this rolling. Hello.
So are they building a block or adobe?
This building was wood.
Yeah, that was wood, but are they building that?
They used, well, I'll tell you. The man who's speaking is Vine Deloria. His father was Philip Deloria, ordained by Bishop Hobart Hare. So this goes back into the, his father would have gone back into the 1880s, 1870s.
Among non-Indians, often we make friends and have good friends. But among the Indians, instead of making
Here we're breaking the ground
they make friendships too.
for the new building.
They sit on relationship. I wish often that
It's going to be a multi-purpose building where there's no rooms that are really just for themselves except for the kitchen, a couple of bathrooms, and my office space. Otherwise, it's all open.
successfully emphasize this closeness and care of people for one another. That is, it's a holy fellowship, a holy society. And each verse describes a certain aspect of this society. And then it concludes with a doxology, that is Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, praising God and saying that is the best society of all.
So the unit itself is building the church.
Well, we've hired a contractor to do it, but we've designed it with him. And so these big timbers going up are like lodge poles. A teepee would have 12 lodge poles. This building has 12. And then these are the beginning of Dreamcatcher purlins. The design originally came from a young man that we took to the National Cathedral. We took some native young people from North and South Dakota to the National Cathedral to talk about our faith, our theology, and how our theology is reflected in our buildings and what our buildings teach us. And so in the National Cathedral, you have the great transcendence of God, and you have chapels that have this very close feeling of very immanent of God. And so he drew this design, not intending that we'd ever be able to get a building like this, but there it is. So we hope to consecrate on June the 15th during the Cannonball Powwow weekend. Bishop will be there and consecrate it, and then we'll have a feed, and then people will go back to the powwow, and then at supper time we're going to do another service of baptisms. And so you saw a rock in there, a stone. We have an artist in the community. His name is Charles McLaughlin, and he's going to carve that into a buffalo boat, which is a bowl kind of a shape that has a buffalo hide stretched over it. So as he carves it, he'll leave the outside rough, and then he'll carve and show how the willow branches hold the thing together, and so that will become our baptism font. It's the way that they crossed the river. It's the way that they get across to the other side. And so our Christian faith talks about baptism in that way. And we're going to go across Jordan. And they went across the Missouri. And they came across the Missouri, these Dakota people did. There was one group of them who came across to escape the cavalry. There had been a massacre at Whitestone Hill in early September of 1863. And the survivors of that massacre made their way across the rest of the state, or the rest of the territory, and across the Missouri River and among the people who were already there in Cannonball. And we have members of our congregation who are descendants from that. So if you've ever seen the movie Schindler's List, and they're putting the rocks on his grave at the end, that's what we have in Cannonball all the time. Are people who are those kinds of descendants from a tragedy that took place. I'd like to sing a song for you. I can find my phone as we begin. Would you be able to pull that door shut too, so I don't disturb the whole created order here? The song that I'm about to sing was sung by 38 Dakota men as they were brought to the gallows in Minnesota the day after Christmas, 1862. Many and great, O God, are your works, maker of earth and sky. Your hands have set the heavens with stars. Your fingers spread the mountains and plains. Lo, at your word the waters were formed. Deep seas obey your voice. Grant unto us communion with thee, O star abiding one. Come unto us and dwell with us. With you are found the gifts of life. Bless us with life that has no end, eternal life with thee. That's in the 1982 hymnal. It's the first hymn that was written first in the Dakota language to a Dakota tune, and then later translated into English. We have a hymnal that's full of songs that were first English hymns, and maybe even German, hymns before that, then translated into Dakota and put to the common tunes that we sing. This book hasn't been updated since 1893. Yes. The prayer book that the Episcopal Church has used among the Dakota has been changed 3 times. And each time that it's changed, it takes 40 years for the church to translate it into a book about this size for worship. So the 1979 prayer book has yet to be translated very fully. We have some services that are translated, but not very fully yet. I'm working with some people on Standing Rock to do Eucharistic Prayer B. And General Convention last summer passed a resolution that said that we will authorize the use of dynamic equivalents to translate and not literal translation being needed for Bible and for prayer book translations, which is a huge step for us to make, because while it was brought forward because of Hispanic ministry, that the translations that have been used in the past are literal translations and don't always convey the meaning as well. I was on that committee that was dealing with this, and I said, you know what, as soon as we pass this, I'm going to apply it to us as well on the Standing Rock Reservation. And so a person across the room said, you know what, let's make that part of the resolution. And so we made it a sweeping resolution that dynamic equivalent translation is an acceptable thing for the prayer book. So that the custodian of the prayer book can authorize, can say, yes, this is indeed what the church was wanting to say and worship with when it passed the 1979 prayer book in the first place. So these are good things for us in Indian country. My name is John Floberg. That's the name that was given to me by my parents at baptism. John. 2 years ago, which was my 20th year on Standing Rock, members of the tribe gave me a new name to add on to that. And that name is Nape Wakan. Nape is hand, and Waka in the Dakota language, or Lakota, is holy. It can also mean mysterious, but in my case, it does not mean that. It means holy hand. And so I've been humbled by them in getting that name. As I said, I've been on Standing Rock now it'll be 22 years on July 1st. And I don't have an exit date. I don't know what that looks like. When I first went there, my bishop told me that he wanted me to stay between 5 and 8 years as a minimum. And by the time the 8th year rolled around, I had lost complete track of where the back door was, and I haven't been able to figure that out. And I don't want to figure that out. I want to find ways of staying there as long as I possibly can, as long as God possibly wants me there. And part of the reason for that is that it's not that reservation leaders or ministers. My whole business about it is that they don't like we need Native people doing ministry, and the relationship that I've built with people there has been producing that. We have ordained a couple of men as priests. We've ordained others as deacons, men and women as deacons, and we have vital ministry going on. On Standing Rock, half of our population is under the age of 20. And so youth ministry is something that we absolutely have to be engaged, involved with. And so we partner with Young Life as a way of doing that. It's not that we went to them and said, hey, we're completely lost and we don't know how to do this. Instead, they saw what we were doing and they came to us and they said, you know what, you're doing things the way that we would promote them being done, which is incarnational ministry, getting into life with people. And they said, I'll bet you that you could use some resources. And we said, yeah, we really could. Standing Rock, the county that we're in, Sioux County, is the poorest county in North Dakota. We're the 14th poorest county in the United States. Indian reservations make up about half of the poorest counties that are in the United States, in one place or another. The poorest is in South Dakota on what is called the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation.
I'm curious because you see there are the casinos everywhere.
Yeah.
And the Indians are just, they're thriving and there's lots of money in their reservations. And so I'm just curious, are there no casinos?
What you need in order to have a casino being having great profits is a population base around it. By definition, North Dakota does not have that. We have one congressman for the whole state of North Dakota. And so there aren't large metropolitan areas that make much for casinos to profit off of. What benefits Standing Rock in a casino more than anything else, in my opinion, is the jobs that it creates for people who need jobs. We're 65% unemployed. And so this gives entry-level work. We have a very high rate of high school dropouts, not getting their diplomas and that sort of thing. The thing that the way that I want to talk about doing ministry in Native communities is to talk about how the generations, family system. The video that you just watched had Brian Deloria making some comments about this hymn, and he was talking about the kinship system. In Native culture, and I'm going to speak directly about Dakota, Lakota people, but it can also spread pretty broadly among a lot of Native people, is that the grandfather and the grandmother are really the heads of the family, and they remain that until their passing. And so I have 3 brothers myself. Our children, if we were Native, would consider each of us as their father. My sisters, their children would consider each of them to be mothers. So we're not looking at a straight biological line on things. But it goes well beyond that. And if you get this down, you'll have a good portion of what you need to know about doing ministry with Native people and being in their community. 7 generations is how they speak about the family and their community. Now, stop and think about 7 generations. Are they talking about 7 generations from now until the 7th generation is born? Or are they talking about that you're in the midst of 7 generations? Okay? And the answer is it goes both ways. It depends on what's being talked about. If you're talking about the restoration of the people following the Wounded Knee Massacre and Black Elk's vision about the 7 generations, what you're talking about from 1890 out to about the present now is 7 generations. But if you're talking about the way that the family exists, now you're talking about somebody who's in the middle of those 7 generations. So you're either in the 3rd or the 4th generation, which means that you might not know, you probably don't remember the first of the generations. And that would be somebody who is your great-great-grandparent, I believe. Okay? So here's how I've got it written. We know our siblings' generation. Okay? You know where you are. You know your parents' generation. And you know your grandparents' generation. What you would more than likely call great uncles and great aunts. You might know your great grandparents' generation, maybe. But we do not know your great great grandparents. Just there's very little way that any of us would have a memory of them. As adults, we know our children's generation, and we know our grandchildren's generation, and we may know our great-grandchildren's generation, but we won't know our great-great-grandchildren's generation as they would mature, who they've become. Okay? We may have some elders among us who are old enough to that they're quite old and they do have great-great-grandchildren being born, but they'll never know what's ever come of their life. Okay? When you're in the community doing ministry, the group who's in the middle of that, those who are adults, are to be giving their life to the care and the concern of the elders and to the children. If you try to go in and do ministry that is focused purely on that generation of people, they probably won't respond much to it because it's not about them. It's about the elders and it's about the children. And the children can come up into the later teen years. Okay? And so it's important to have children's ministries going on. It's important to have youth ministry going on. And it's important to find ways of respecting and honoring elders. And the people who are in that middle, the ministry that you're going to be best to do are ministries of ministry development. How do they engage in ministry? Now, some of them are going to need to have been dealing with AA groups, needing to get sobriety, needing to get education. They may have dropped out of high school before they graduated and they need to get those things. And so the church can be involved in helping them to do that. But from my perspective, it's not to do that for them as an individual. It's to get them into their place in their community where they can take on the responsibilities that the community asks of them and expects of them. Okay? So when I came to Standing Rock, I had a man in our congregation who was 90 years old, and for the next 10 years he taught me until he passed away at 101. And Bill Littlebird is his name, and he was married for 67 years to his wife Emily. She passed away a couple of years before he did. But Bill was around and involved in the church ever since he was a very young child. But his parents were first-generation Christians. Okay? When you go out on the plains, and among the Plains Indians, the Christian faith doesn't get there until the 1870s. Standing Rock becomes a reservation of itself in 1873. That's when things started to get settled down about living in a place. Otherwise, they were nomadic. The Lakota, more than the Dakota, were nomadic. Dakota would even build earth lodges and stay in them, so that's rather permanent. But the Lakota living in teepees, they followed the buffalo, and they would move from place to place. And the church never really did that with them. By the time the church gets there, we come at the same time that the United States government does. And in fact, we're linked up. Every once in a while on Facebook, I'll find people who are making some disparaging remark about people in the church, that the church has no business in the public square, in politics. The church has no business there. And I went, what country did you grow up in? Because I know that in 1868, President Grant had his commissioners sitting down with church leaders from the various denominations, and they divided up the reservations to supervise. And so the Episcopal Church largely had South Dakota, the Roman Church largely had Montana, the Baptists largely had Oklahoma, and it was set. And that's why you find today that there are certain churches that are really dominant in an area. And again, where I'm at, it was the Roman Church that had charge of this North Dakota side of Standing Rock. But that plan didn't work very long. The church went back to the government and said, you know what? You weren't taking care of the people before, and we stepped in to assist in the administration. Now you're not taking care of the people by not giving us the means to administer the reservation, so you can have it back. And at that time, then the reservations were opened up for multiple denominations to be there. And so Standing Rock has the historic denominations of Roman Catholic, Episcopal, and United Church of Christ, or Congregational, there. In the 1950s, the Pentecostal revival came through. And when it came through, the Catholic Church had a split, the Episcopal Church had a split, and the Congregational Church had a split. But those Pentecostal folks didn't join a new church together. They just formed 3 new Pentecostal churches. And so when you go on the reservation today, you're going to find, like in Cannonball, a community with 800 people living in and around it. There's a Roman church, there's an Episcopal church, there is a Congregational church. Up until last summer, there were 2 Baptist churches, and there were 3 Pentecostal churches. And it's the most churched place as far as churches, but the reality is that they're split up. But the Episcopal Church in Cannonball would account for 250 people out of the 800. The Catholic Church is going to count for about another 250, 300 out of that. And so then that leaves the Congregational Church and the Baptists and that. What happens in the summer times is that many communities end up having a lot of mission groups come through. And those are good things, and those are not so good things. I've had telephone calls from people in the community saying, "When are you bringing my child home?" And I said, your kid's not over here. "Well, didn't you have Vacation Bible School this week?" "No." "Who has Vacation Bible School this week?" "Nobody in this town." "Well, there was a van that came by and picked up our kids." "Maybe McLaughlin has, 25 miles away." And the kids will get in the van and they'll go. And the parents or the guardian, the grandparents, they won't know where the kids are. And it's partly due to the fact that the people who are coming in to do the Vacation Bible School, they want numbers. And so they'll go and do whatever they need to get the numbers of kids at their program. Even if that means driving 25 miles to the next community and not communicating with the families there, and not even being really connected to any church that's there, okay? Because there are, the more free church folks that there are, they believe that getting the message of salvation out to the kids is what's important, and not that they are connecting for a life lived inside of a fellowship of faith, okay? So we're trying to bring our generations together. And what we need when groups come to help out in the summer is to recognize that. The first thing in doing that is getting the right perspective when you're at home. This ministry is never a program. Okay? There are groups that send all sorts of youth groups on short-term missions. This is 20 plus years of jauntist views, okay? Some of those groups, when they're sending these youth out on a mission, it's the youth pastor in that church who's looking for a way to plug their kids into something that they don't have any commitment to incarnationally. Lasting person-to-person relationship. Okay? So they get the kids signed up. This organization has everything planned out, and they send them. Sometimes those work out really well. Usually when they're construction kind of projects, put a paintbrush in a kid's hand or a hammer and a saw, and that they build something that's going to last, or they paint something that's going to preserve it. That's helpful. And it helps the church's mission there too, when you don't just go and paint the church and shingle the church and take care of the church. It's important to help us take care of our buildings, but it's also important for our churches not to be seen in the community as receiving help from outside and it's just about us. It's about taking care of our stuff, okay? And so it doesn't have to be that the group is doing both things. What has to be is that who's ever on the ground receiving these groups are doing both things. And so to find people who will come and do something for the community, as well as finding groups who will come and do something for the church. Those seem to work well. One of the difficulties of coming as a short-term mission group is that if you have between 10, 12 people and 25 or 30, you know what's going to happen when you arrive in that small native church and you're even there for a Sunday morning worship? You're going to overwhelm their normal. And what we find that happens is that our elders want to come into the church and pray quietly before the service, and you've all of a sudden got all these teenagers jabbering away in their space. And they're not finding out how the community functions because they've overwhelmed the community. They're more than what the community is able to live out its normal life. So somehow, if you bring a group onto a reservation and into a small native congregation, and we normally are small. Depends on where the powwow is that weekend. That summer service could be a few people. It could be 25, it could be 30, but we don't see a lot of our congregations up over 35 and 40 people on a regular basis. Okay? So if you bring in 20 people with you and there's 20 people there, you have now just lost the ability on your own to observe how it is that they're a community. And that takes work about how to do that, about how to get back far enough away from overwhelming the community so that you can see how they do. So what ends up going about is a stereotype that you'll have a stereotype that Indian people are stoic. They are the least stoic people I've ever met. Their humor is off the charts if they know you. If they don't know you, they're not going to they're not going to be involved in humor. But once you'll know that you're getting into that community when they start joking around you and you become part of their joking. Then you're making headway in relationship.
Okay, I have a question for you. When the mission trips come in, where do they stay? Are they not housed at the church?
A lot of times churches will have you bring in tents and sleep in tents. Other times you'll sleep in the floor of the church or the parish hall. Typically, we don't like people sleeping in front of the altar. We don't want people in that space. In fact, in this new building that we're putting up, the altar is going to be able to slide back against the east wall, and we're going to be able to bring a curtain over it so that we can use the space in that room as multi-purpose, that we can eat there and have tables set up in there and stuff like that, have youth group going on. But there's a very profound sense of what is respectful and what is holy, and you don't do things that are not respectful in front of holy things. And so an altar is holy, and you'd want to find out where they normally have people sleeping. You'll want to find out if it's a tent, where it is that you'll set up, and how you'll use bathrooms and all of that sort of thing. In our case, on Standing Rock, we also have a camp. We've built one several years ago. Our learning is that we are very willing to be involved as partners with the tribe with the community, but we need to make sure that we have our own property to do things in so that they can be done consistently, which is also an important piece of what mission groups bring, is are you going to be consistent in it? Typically coming for a year, if you go the first time, ask them if it's okay for you to consider coming again and again after that, but that you can use the first time to help in discerning that. But the current that is underneath everything in a Native community is relationship. Years ago, I had a woman in Fort Yates who would cut my hair. Her family was Episcopal, but she was in the Mormon church at that time. And she said, Father John, how come you guys are able to get youth groups going and you're able to do this and you're able to do that? And I don't see that happening in our church. And I wouldn't tell her the reason. The reason is that they bring in elders for only up to 2 years. And then they leave again. And then another couple comes in, stays there for up to 2 years, and then they leave again. Mormonism has not taken hold on Standing Rock because they don't understand relationship. And Standing Rock people do. And so what Standing Rock people will say is, we gave you our heart, and now you've taken it. When you bring teenagers on a reservation, the children who are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old will know every one of your teenagers' names, and the next year they will ask where they are.
Yeah, I went on several mission trips. I've been on a bunch to Haiti. And I went the first couple of years. It's like they didn't really want to know you.
Yep.
And when I questioned that, they said, when they see you, they're going to come back.
Yep.
They really have their best interest in your heart.
That's right.
And I went for about a year or so. We continued to carry on letters and back and forth.
Yep.
Wonderful. Now I know them, they don't know me.
Yep. Yep. That's right. It has to be relational. If you understand family and you do relationship, you're not just looking at that kid. You're also getting to know not only their siblings, but you got to find out who their grandma is. If nothing else, for discipline.
I support the family, and I've been doing it for many years now, so I've watched it from school.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing.
Neville?
Well, I'm from Palm Bay. I came up with a joint with my priest and the chairman of the Brotherhood. I contributed to the Dakota Indians over the years. They sent me blankets and these feathers and stuff like that. I would like to know more about them, but is there any literature that I could buy to tell them more about it? First of all, they're speaking, right?
That's right. Yep. Yes.
So are they really Christian now, or they still continue with their tribal ways, or what? I mean, the church is trying to change them into Christianity. Is that what it is, right?
We no longer would say that to be a Christian is anything different than being a Native person. What we are hoping for is that, let me back up just a minute. I am 100% Norwegian. Grew up in Minnesota. But I know where I come from in Norway. I know the church building that's been standing there for nearly 1,000 years. Okay? And I've worshiped in that building. And I can look in that building and I can see when my Viking ancestors first became Christian, they had a very plain building. Built with their technology of how to build a ship, they built churches, but they were plain. Over the course of 300 years, those churches began to change on the inside. And if you were to go into a Norwegian community, somehow get there blindfolded, not know what country you're in, and you go into that church, in a matter of minutes, you're going to be able to know you're in a Norwegian church because they've been able to express their Christian faith through their culture. Okay? Before St. James burned, you walk into that church and you wouldn't know where you were because it was like most any Anglo church building. When we rebuild, you're going to walk in there and you're going to take your blindfold off and you're going to look up and you're going to see a canvas ceiling as if you were in a teepee. And you're going to see a carved eagle as a lectern. And you're going to see this baptism font that's carved out of stone, but in the shape of a bull boat. We're 150 years into this Christianity thing with Dakota people. They're on Standing Rock. And they are expressing the Christian faith now through their culture. Beginning to. There's the fellow that you heard singing, Vine Deloria, most revered priest, he and his father. I don't know if you know who Vine Deloria's son is, but it's Vine Deloria Jr. Vine Deloria Jr. wrote this book, The World We Used to Live In. Vine Deloria threw off most of what was Christian about his upbringing. And I think it's true that when you force assimilation, that doesn't take root. And so after a couple generations and a few changes in the law, like in 1970, the Freedom of Religion Act for Native American people, up until 1970, they could not practice their own religions. They were put away. We had a bishop in North Dakota who came out to a convocation on Standing Rock, and he told the men, you need to put away everything that's Indian in order to be good churchmen. And they pointed to the archdeacon and they said, does he have to put away those beaded moccasins too? And the bishop said, yes, those two. And they put them all in a barrel and they sealed it and they took it away. Last summer, we hosted the Niobrara Convocation on our side of Standing Rock. First time that it came across the border. And a man by the name of Dakota Goodhouse, whose grandfather was Innocent Goodhouse, who was a priest for 20 years where I serve. He died on July the 5th. I got there on July the 1st. Okay? Dakota had taken a buffalo robe and he he drew a winter count on it. The winter count is the life of Jesus from the Gospel of Luke. And this is the little book that he drew. Each story has a pictograph, okay? And he started in the center, and he worked out through Jesus' life and ministry all the way out to his ascension, okay? We put that buffalo robe in a barrel, and we closed the barrel. And then we had a service where we took the book of occasional services, and there's a service in there about restoring of things profaned. The church had declared that these things were profane, unholy. You can't have them as Christian people. Okay? And so we restored the use of the buffalo robe with that liturgy. And then we had the bishop bless it as though he were blessing a stained glass window. And now that buffalo robe is displayed at St. Luke's Church in Fort Yates, where I also serve as priest there. And it tells the Gospel of Luke through their traditional way. Okay? So we're certainly saying that Jesus Christ is the Son of God who came into this world to save us. But we're trying now to have that said through means which are indigenous. So right now our practice is that, one, we don't bring anything into the church that traditional people who are holding only to the Lakota religion, if they don't think that we should be bringing that into the church, we don't bring it in. So we don't make any use of the pipe in our service. The pipe is a sacred thing for Lakotas. But we do bring in sage that is used by Lakotas in their traditional ceremonies. And we use it in place of any other incense that we'd typically have. But we're using a natural thing from that environment instead of necessarily bringing it in from someplace else. Actually, I leave it up to the deacon. If the deacon wants to use frankincense, we use frankincense. If the deacon wants to use sage, we use sage. And that's the way that happens. Where we run into difficulty is when people who are in partnership with us are looking for us to become more Indian than what we are. I prefer to have Indian people say what is Indian. And that their imprimatur on it is all that's necessary. We do things on Standing Rock that people in other places don't do or wouldn't consider yet. And we don't tell them that they have to. That would be really inappropriate way of communicating anyway. But if we don't bring the gospel out, then there's a real question, why are we there? Yeah. But Navajo people, they raise sheep. So the stories about sheep in the Old Testament and the New Testament, they understand those. Dakota people, no sheep. They knew about buffaloes. They knew how to hunt a buffalo. They knew how to hunt deer. They knew how to go out and get wild game, and not domestic things. The only thing that they had that was really domestic, I think, is that they had horse, not to eat but to ride, and that they'd have dogs. But they didn't corral anything. In fact, there's still some offense about fence lines being up and corralling things. So this picture that you can take that's on the back table has Jesus' face implanted on a buffalo, which is within an eagle, which has on its side a medicine wheel. And that's a real enculturated drawing, and it was drawn by a fellow by the name of Dallas Dogskin. Yeah. And so we're going to emphasize Jesus as warrior rather than Jesus as shepherd. But what does a warrior do for his family? He protects them. What does a shepherd do for the sheep? Protects them. So we can get to the same essence of the gospel, but talk about the things, use the images that are there that are readily able to be brought in, that you don't have to explain something further. I mentioned that we do Young Life youth ministry, and one of the things that we really make very clear about how we do it is that when a kid comes into our club, the threshold is very, very low. They don't need to ascribe to anything except just some behavior issue stuff to be able to come in. And that's the way that we need to be making sure that the gospel is being presented in a community that isn't Christian to begin with, wasn't Christian generations ago. You know, we're dealing with Bill's parents, Bill's children, grandchildren. We're at best about 5 generations in. And old ways. Even kids who really haven't even been learning or using the Dakota language, except for some things in school, you can still tell that they're Dakota people. At the Easter Vigil service, we had this young man, 17 years old. He was reading one of the lessons about the Israelites. Well, if you take that word and try to pronounce it as a Dakota person, you're going to pronounce every vowel there. Israelites, okay? And you know what? He never grew up with Dakota being spoken in his home. But that's the way that he pronounced that word. He pronounced every single vowel every time that word came up. And I went, no, that's Israelite. But no, he made sure, because that's the way that that this hymnal works, is that every vowel is pronounced. And you only change a note when there's a vowel. How in the world they got that complicated in order to create a hymnal, I'll never know. But what I do know is that not all of the hymns are translated anywhere near literal. They have the tune, and so they call it that song. But it has a whole different, it may have a whole different meaning. All right. Where are we for time? Okay.
I thought when you said something about the design of the church,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned green cap.
Right.
I heard something earlier today that someone in our church, he ministers to the natives.
Mm-hmm.
But he was taking a lot of heat from a senior pastor because the dream catcher is not from God or something like that.
It's not in the Bible.
Well,
But,
I heard that, but I
yeah.
didn't quite understand it.
Yeah.
And so I wondered how that comes into play.
Yeah.
He said something like, if it's not from God, it's whatever, almost like an idol. I didn't
Right.
quite understand.
Yeah.
I didn't follow it until I decided to come to here.
Yeah. Native spirituality, from early on, their traditional ways were called to be of the devil. Doing a sweat lodge was considered to be in a place where you're worshiping the devil or an idol. The way that you have to get in a native community is to first understand that their people never went through the Enlightenment. Okay? When the Enlightenment was sweeping Europe, native people had no connection to it. In fact, they didn't have connection to the Industrial Revolution. Okay? So our Western way of dividing things very neatly between what is spiritual and what is temporal is not divided in their way of thinking. Inanimate objects are not inanimate. Remember the story of Jesus? He's telling the people that he's telling his disciples to let these people keep praising God, because if they don't, the rocks will cry out. Okay, remember that? Yeah, there you go. Yeah. If they don't praise God, the rocks will cry out. What a native person would say is the rocks are crying out. It's just that we haven't been quiet enough to hear them. And so when Jesus said, if we be quiet, they will cry out, he's affirming a Native American's worldview that rocks have an ability to communicate. And they release that ability of communication when they're heated up for a sweat lodge ceremony, and they're put into the sweat lodge and water is poured on them and the steam comes out. The rock is releasing what it knows.
So Christianity brought that not comparison, but that truth. Okay, so now the rocks are crying out for God,
No.
or they have always believed the rocks are crying out to the Creator.
Yeah, they're saying that the rocks have a life. And Western people say, no, a rock doesn't have any life. A rock is absolutely dead. But when Jesus talks about giving glory to God, what he's saying is that things, whatever it is in the created order, is doing what it was created to do. That's one of the ways of understanding what glory is all about, is that you're doing what you were created to do. So an uncle gives glory to God by acting like an uncle. A dad gives glory to God by acting towards his children like a dad. A building with rocks, those rocks give glory to God because they hold up, they do the thing that they were set there to do, and you can trust them to stay there. And so they give glory to God. So our Western mindset, I would even say, for even those who have been involved in Pentecostal or charismatic renewal in the church, we still have the Enlightenment in the back of our head, and we believe in angels, but really, I'll be called on several times a year to go and do a blessing in a house, not because somebody's moved into a new house and they want to have a nice little cheese party there, but because they've got spirits that are bothering them. And if I were to use all of my academic learning, Western style, I'd say, no, there's nothing that can be bothering you in there. It must be just the wind blowing through a screen. Well,
So are you saying that you're taking the principles of spiritual warfare that you understand from your Western mind and overlaying it with their understanding of the spirit world and trying to come to some sort of consensus? That you're meeting, that there are spiritual people already.
yeah.
So you're trying to meet at a place that's a holy place, but from two different points of view.
Yeah, I'll always say that no matter how long I live and do ministry among Standing Rock people, I will always interpret things first from my own cultural upbringing. I can't get rid of that. I can never enter a situation where I first respond to it as a Native person would respond.
But the basic tenets of the faith are still the basic tenets of our Christian faith.
Right.
That Christ was born of a virgin.
Yeah, they'd have no problem with that. They have less problem with that than most Western Christians do. Yeah, because they don't have a problem with Wakan being able to do very mysterious things. So if
do you feel that I have a little knowledge of the Sudanese people and their altars of antlers and eventually made them into crosses, and a book called The Poisonwood Bible, which I thought was that funny? Well, I thought it was a really relevant book in that it took a very spiritual people and a very narrow-minded minister who kept trying to mold them into his idea of what a church and a congregation would be, and offended them all over the place, as opposed to meeting them. And that's what I think I hear you saying. And it's perhaps what I was hearing Dr. Kumar say in the Hindi, meeting people where they are, incorporating the truths of our Christian faith, and trying to accept those symbols and cultural adaptations from their spiritual walk into a meaningful, relevant, adapted to their culture Christian faith.
yes,
yeah. I don't have a problem with that. I wanted to make sure that I was absorbing what you were saying.
Where I conversion of a culture takes generations to do.
Exactly.
And so I want those folks to be reading the same canonical scripture that I and my family have read, and to be coming to the understanding from within their culture of what does that mean? Because those scriptures have already come to me through multiple cultures.
Yes.
And so I have to work to understand what they mean for me. In some cultures, it is probably still appropriate that women wear coverings on their heads in worship. In other cultures, we don't make any deal about women wearing coverings on their heads in worship. But we're dealing with the same Bible. But part of it, too, is what offends the conscience of the believer. When Bill Littlebird was alive, I had made it clear with myself as his priest that I would do nothing that I knew would cause his conscience offense. And he was told by faithful people that to be a Christian man, he had to put away being Indian. Okay? I'm not going to convince a 90-year-old man that they were wrong and this white guy's right. Okay? I've got just a tad of humility that allows me to get in that position and say that I'm not going to tell people that those white people were wrong and this white person is right. I want them to get to a place where they say, we believe this, and this is why we believe it. And that won't happen in my lifetime. I will be in the dirt a very, very long time before that 300 years is up, and will have seen what Native people have done with the Christian faith. But I know that from my own family experience of being Norwegian, that 1,000 years that they've spent being Christian, you might look at Norway as not being a very churched people now, but my goodness, are their attitudes ever Christian? The kindness that they have, the respect that they show people. I mean, we get a lot of people, and this is getting off topic, but we get a lot of people pretty excited about socialism and stuff, and whether this country is not socialist, and and I go and visit my relative in Norway, and Norway has a socialist form of economy there, and the way that they treat people who are in nursing homes is a whole lot different than how we treat them. The money that's spent for their care comes to them first, and then they pay for their nursing home care, and then they have their money left to do what they would do, instead of it going to the nursing home, and if there's anything left, then you get some kind of an allowance from it. Okay, and I went, where did that come from? And I went, yeah, I know exactly where it comes from. It comes from respect that's been learned as being Christian. and even if they're not attending church in the same numbers that other places have it, they still have a very Christian way about doing things. Another example, you drive down the highway, and in this country, click it or ticket. Very punitive kind of law enforcement. Over there, you drive down the highway, and they've got this big picture on a pole on the side of the road with a man with his younger daughter. This is why you drive the speed limit. You need to get home to her. It's not punitive. And again, I ask, well, where did they get that from? Well, they got that from being Christian.
Well, you live throughout the Old Testament, how the Pharisees didn't want anything to do with Jesus because he didn't obey their law.
Yeah.
And man always wants to put their laws so they can have the control. And that's not God.
Yeah.
And we do that in all of the countries that we go into. We want to instill our laws, and they're not God's laws.
Let me give you some real basic kind of fundamental stuff about bringing a group on a reservation. Your teenagers should never be bringing with them the newest, latest thing in culture. Okay? You need to see it on the res before you allow your kids to have it. Okay? I wasn't going to let any group that came on Standing Rock come with piercings until I started seeing piercings. Once I started seeing piercings, then I'm not going to have a grandma come to me and say, hey, it was you guys that brought this here. Okay? So you dress and you model yourself with a bit conservatively. You really make sure that your boys and your girls know that this is not the place to be hooking up in relationships, boyfriend, girlfriend things. Yes. If God really has that one in store for you to be married to, then God in his almightiness is going to have to figure out some other way of you two getting together. But it's not going to be during the mission trip. You have to always think about how you're not going to leave more problems for the local leaders when you leave.
Technology? Just a question.
You should never bring anything with you that you aren't willing to leave behind without any squabbling about it. Okay? If you bring an iPhone, then you better be willing to go home without your iPhone, because we don't know who might have taken it. We don't know whether you lost it. But what we don't need is any of your accusations that our kids took it, even if our kid took it. Because if the accusation is false, the damage is done. Sir?
What is relationship, or they form relationship? Like the parents pick mate for their sons and daughters, or they just naturally fall in love like regular?
Yes.
Like the Indians in India, they get married
Right.
9 years old and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Prearranged.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as prearranged relationships there. What there are, though, is there are guardians or parents who will allow their 14 and 15-year-old kids to cohabitate with other 14 and 15-year-old kids in their own home. Well, until they break up.
The last question, which state are the more prevalent in America? The Dakotas. Which state?
In North Dakota or South Dakota, which has more Native people?
Yeah. You are in North Dakota.
I'm in North Dakota.
Oh, so the Indians are more prevalent up here.
South Dakota has a higher percentage of Native people living in South Dakota among other.
Throughout the United States. I think that you're wanting to know where are the Indian tribes.
Where are the Indian people?
They're
Most of our states are named by Indian names. Okay? Most of the United States have an Indian name. Minnesota, that's a Dakota word. It means little water. Okay?
Arizona,
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah.
Just different tribes.
So there's spread
The only place where Native people are not is where they forced them to go somewhere else. Trail of Tears, the Long Walk, Cherokee from the East Coast over. But you'll find that there are Porch Creek Indians down in southern Alabama who hid out in the woods when the rest of them were being taken to Oklahoma. But this is really a big thing that you touched on. We conservatively estimate, that 90% of the native population that was here on what they call Turtle Island in North America at the time of Christopher Columbus, 90% has been wiped out. Maybe gone, 95% of the population. That genocide, huh? Yes, and that raises a whole other problem. Because in 1920, Congress passed an act that opened up the reservations to homesteaders, okay, for land that wasn't already allotted to a head of household in an Indian family, based on the population that was there then. That was the low tide. Since then, the population's been rising. And they have now the land that a husband and wife had, which was a section of land. Now that is divided by maybe 250 people, maybe 75 people, but it's a large number of people. And the only way that you can put a house on that land is if you can get everybody else to agree that you can have these 5 acres. And that 5 acres are by the road, by the electric pole that comes by, and how many do you have like that on that whole parcel of land? So it's just a mess. And you might have just heard about the Cobell settlement, the Salazar settlement. There's been this huge lawsuit against the federal government since the time of President Clinton onward, where the Secretary of State and the Undersecretary for the Bureau of Indian Affairs were held in contempt of U.S. court. Held in contempt and threatened with jail because of the way that the United States government was handling the property, the mineral rights and lease land monies. They didn't have records to show why this family in Oklahoma was getting this much for oil and this family was getting different amount. They couldn't show that there was any relationship. And they found that the records that were being kept were in cardboard boxes in garage buildings. President Clinton, President Bush, finally in Obama's term, that it made it through Congress where a settlement was made in the billions of dollars to repay Native people for all of that mismanagement, because all of that land is supposed to be held in trust by the United States government for them.
But you know what that does, don't you? Like the Klamath Indians and all those other tribes that the government says, oh, we got a right or wrong. Here, each of you get $50,000. And they buy awesome Cadillacs, they get drunk, they wipe out the Cadillacs,
But
we don't help them,
Gail,
in that.
It's their money to do that with.
Oh, it is, you're
and
absolutely right.
that is the bottom
But
line.
it goes from this generation to the next generation.
But it was their money. It was, and they never came to your home and told you and your family how to spend your money. And so whether you think that it's mismanaged, whether you think that it was wasted, whatever you think about it, it was their money that was rightfully theirs. It would be like somebody coming in my home and stealing $100 from my dresser and then coming back later and giving me the money back, but now telling me how I had to spend it. You can't do it.
I just hate to see them kill themselves.
I do too. I do around 30 funerals a year.
I hate that.
Average life expectancy for a man where I'm at is 47. And for a woman, it's 58.
Yeah. But I just think we should be accountable for that, to help them in that, because they don't know. Just like our alcohol. We, as Europeans, we know alcoholism, alcoholism, we have problems with it, but not like that, because it's been in our generations for so long. And yet,
but there's more reason to it than that. It's not strictly biological. It is that unresolved grief. From the time that Christopher Columbus stepped foot on this continent forward, they've had grief after grief after grief after grief that hasn't had a chance to be resolved. And that is the number one issue that I deal with week in and week out, is grieving. 3 weeks ago, I buried 2 young men from the same family. One was, they were both in their mid-20s. One died of pneumonia. The other one died of a stab wound. And the next week, I buried their first cousin, who was 37 years old, and she collapsed in her room and died. They're supposed to have 1 year for mourning death, and then they do a giveaway, and they do a meal, and they also might have a thing called the wiping of tears. But it literally is so confusing to figure out when does that year start or end, because too many close relatives are dying in that year's time. So do you start and then have to start up again, and then it's unresolved grief.
How are they feeling about healing prayer?
They love it, absolutely love it.
So is that another ministry?
Yes, it is.
That could come.
Yep.
That isn't kid oriented.
Yep. Yes, it is. Yep.
What I work in is
Yep.
healing prayer.
It certainly is.
That might be something to establish a healing prayer team that formed a relationship.
Yes.
With
Work through the leadership. If there's clergy in place, work through them. Because one of the things that can happen is that when adults are coming on the reservation and establishing relationships with other adults, they may not be finding the true leaders of the church, which may end up causing more division.
All right, so you're saying, well, I work with Christian healing
Yeah,
ministries in
yeah.
Jacksonville, but
Yeah.
there are other.
But when if you came on Standing Rock, then I'd want you to work through me. I'll get you in touch with the women who will get this ministry going with.
But you said yourself, you have 6 or 7 different church denominations. Which one do you go work through? You said so yourself. You have your Episcopal, the Roman, 200 people might be.
Oh no, I'll bring you through our leadership.
Right, but I'm saying, okay, so what if you tap into the Baptist or the? I mean, they're all.
Well, then you work through them, and you work through their
and their
pastors.
congregation.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I know the reservation that we're going to, there's 7 churches, all small congregations.
Yeah.
And great. I mean, it's wonderful that we so wanted to help them.
Who are you going to work through there?
Right. Who are we?
Yeah,
An Anglican,
yeah. Huh?
An Anglican church.
There's an Anglican church on
That's my understanding.
or is it Episcopal?
It might be Episcopal.
Yeah, because I don't know that there's any Anglican churches formed yet on any of our reservations. We're in a.
It can be Baptist. You know what? I honestly don't know. Because I'm just going along.
Yeah.
But I'll find out.
Yeah. Just as a disclaimer, not only am I an Episcopal priest, but I'm also on the executive council of the Episcopal Church.
I'm sorry.
And I am able to help advance Native American ministry there at a time when the Episcopal Church is doing more to assist Native American ministry than any time in my ministry.
That's great.
If you could have the ideal team come,
Mm-hmm.
who would it be and what age would they be and what would they do?
Ideal teams probably are half adult and half youth. And that you look at the abilities of the people that are interested in coming, and you communicate that with the leadership of the church that you're going to work with, because the needs are multitude. Okay? If somebody were to tell me that they've got a group of guys who want to come and shingle, you know what? I can find shingling jobs. If they want to come and paint, I can find painting jobs. If they want to come and do vacation Bible school, we can do that. If they want to do a healing ministry, we can do that. If they want to do continuing ed for people who are learning or have been ordained as deacons or priests locally, we've got those people that need continuing ed. So it's really to know who you have in your team and what talents and abilities they have and what kind of leadership they can provide in that team when they're on the ground. And then communicate that with the local leadership, because they'll be able to say, yeah, we can make use of that, or no, we can't. The other piece of that is that if you're going to do construction stuff, that you're actually pretty realistic about how much that could cost. Because half developed jobs aren't helpful.
What, I guess I'm at a loss. Standing Rock, that is a reservation?
Yes.
Is that what we call all the Indian or Native American places? I mean, I grew up in Massachusetts. We have a reservation.
Right.
Down on Edgartown, or a Gayhead Reservation, and then I was in Arizona, and I guess there's a big section of land between Lake Powell and Lake Mead that we had a tour guide on a 6-hour raft trip, and he said, "You own this land, and I live on this reservation."
Right. Standing Rock is named that way because there is a rock that has a story with it where the Lakota people had taken an Arikara girl captive. And she did not want to move with her little child from one village site to another village site when they were going to move. And so she was left. And when she was left, when they got to the new site, they sent back a couple of men to go get her and bring her to the new site. And when they got there, in place of where she was a rock that looks like a woman with a blanket over her holding a child. And so that area became known as Standing Rock.
Standing Rock in North Dakota.
Yeah. And it's also in South Dakota. We're one of the few reservations that split between states. The Navajo do between 4 states, and Standing Rock does between 2, but most reservations are all within one state or another. Sisseton on the northeast side of South Dakota has a very small sliver up into North Dakota. That's left over from before the 2 states became states. And then they drew the line and it had that little sliver.
So they don't, I guess I always thought like a reservation was an offensive type thing, but I guess not.
There's
I thought we supposedly stuck them on a reservation, so they weren't happy.
Some tribes were moved to a place that they never were there before. Okay, Oklahoma is full of that. Okay, but in the Dakotas, that was their traditional land, and so when you think about reservation in the Dakotas, you can also use the word or the understanding that they reserved this land to themselves in the treaty. They said, you can go ahead and live on the rest of that land and take it, but we reserve this to ourselves. And so half of the state of South Dakota was supposed to be the Great Sioux Nation, along with the Black Hills were part of that. And then went up into North Dakota a little bit. And then out in Wyoming and Montana, there were unceded grounds. It wasn't the reservation, but it wasn't land that they had given away either. And it was places where they could go hunt. And according to the 1868 treaty, they could hunt there as long as there was, as long as the wind blew, the grass grew, and there was game worthy of the hunt. They could continue to have that kind of a lifestyle. Then what happens is that they brought the railroads through, killed all the buffalo. And so one piece of the treaty provision was now said, there's not game worthy of the hunt. So now you have to be on the reservation. And so that's when 1876 came around, George Custer out in the Little Bighorn, the Battle of Greasy Grass. And because of that, they carved the Great Sioux Nation up into what we have now for reservations. But in 1873, Custer leads an expedition into the Black Hills after gold, and the Black Hills were part of the sovereign nation of the Great Sioux, and they were not supposed to be on there. But because the Indian people took up arms to repel them, Congress passed a law to take that away from them. In 1980s, 70s, 80s, the U.S. Supreme Court declared that the act of Congress was illegal, and they had to pay for what the land was worth. Congress had to pay for what the land was worth in 1873, plus interest. And the Indian tribes, the Sioux tribes of the Dakotas, have refused that money ever since, because the Black Hills weren't for sale then, they're still not for sale.
What about, you know,